that they
Alright, good evening Earth. This is Adam Sturch broadcasting from the Mushroom Mansion, Taos, New Mexico, working on oil painting Old Tree B. This one is coming along okay. What I'm going to do right now is start in with some bright white glazing to sort of aura out the hole in the foliage, and then down and around the trunk a little bit, just to give it some kind of glow and more contrast with the dark and light. And I also mixed up some cadmium yellow to golden up the light a little bit.
They're now definitely moving to the rear of the parade. They don't have as much hunting success. They don't have as much food for themselves and their offspring. They're not having as much sex, so they're not having as many offspring. And, you know, in terms of rising and falling numbers, those that have some allergy, prejudice, or fear of the mushroom are just being shunted out of the breeding population. Well, at still higher doses, approaching effective doses of 20 milligrams or more, in other words, 4 grams dried and up, or 45 grams wet and up, hunting is out of the question. Sex is something you can consider, but it's out of the question. And you are basically nailed to the ground in a state of mind which we, for all of our sophistication, our logical positivism, our superconducting super colliders, and all the rest of it, haven't a clue as to what it is, what it means, what its implications are. The full-blown psychedelic experience, of which we can only speak in terms of religious hierophany, epiphany, apokatastasis, and all those other great Greek words, ataraxia. You know, in other words, we like it, but we don't understand it. And it is, therefore, the basis for religion. Well, so right there, you have a 3-step process driven by nothing more than hunger and curiosity that leads remote primate ancestors to a confrontation with what Rudolf Otto called the holy other, the holy, the numinous, the transcendental. And, you know, this is on slightly less firm ground, but in my own personal experience and having collected psychedelic experiences lifelong, I feel confident in saying that at high doses, psilocybin causes glossolalia. Glossolalia is syntactically structured language-like behavior in the absence of meaning. Speaking in tongues is what Christian fundamentalists call it, but they don't have monopoly on it. It's ancient. It occurs in all cultures. It's shamanic. And what it is it's a kind of neurological seizure where linguistic organization spontaneously is verbalized. No animal does this. It must have something to do with the acquisition of language by human beings. And what I think is going on is that probably language was entertainment long before it was meaning. That it's a kind of tuneless singing, and that having discovered that we could make an almost endless repertoire of small mouth noises, we did this for each other, for amusement, to pass the time. I mean, God knows there was a lot of it. And it probably was very late in the evolution of this ability that some very tight-assed rational type said, you know, we could attach a specific meaning to a specific sound, and then every time I made that sound, you'd know what I meant, and then you could go and get it for me. You see, it's a sort of, it's the as long as you're up, get me a grants theory of language. So that's the basic idea. And I really believe that sometime in the last 50,000 years, before 12,000 years ago, a kind of paradise came into existence. A situation in which men and women, parents and children, people and animals, human institutions and the land, all were in dynamic balance. And not in any primitive sense at all. Language was fully developed. Poetry may have been at its climax. Dance, magic, poetics, altruism, philosophy. There's no reason to think that these things were not practiced as adroitly as we practice them today. And it was under the aegis of the boundary-dissolving influence of psilocybin. We were nomadic. We were breeders and caretakers of cattle. We worshipped a great goddess. We followed a yearly round in a vast grassland cut by crystal streams that were washing down out of the higher altitudes. And we were probably black as your hat, for that matter. And it was great. Well, if it was so great, what happened? Well, the very forces which created this situation, and you will recall what it was the drying of the African continent, forcing us out of the trees, forcing us to change our diet, forcing us to accept a dung-growing mushroom, and there were other factors forcing us into consciousness as well. When we became omnivorous, the first form of consciousness is having the point of view of your prey. Predatory animals have the highest form of animal consciousness, big cats, but it's a consciousness of the exterior world. Psilocybin forced us beyond that into consciousness of the imaginal world, the world of the imagination inside our heads. What happened was the mushroom faded. The climate changed. What had been everywhere became seasonal, moved into the rain shadows of mountains, became the prerogative of a special class of people called shamans, who were like the designated hitters for dealing with the hyperspace of the mythos. And in other words, over millennia, the connection went from available to everyone all the time to ever more tenuous, finally faded out entirely. It's even more complicated than that, because surely people would have, as they saw this happening, make attempts to preserve the mushroom. And in a world without refrigeration, the only effective way to do this is preservation in honey. You can dry mushrooms, but in a world without hermetically sealed peanut butter jars, drying is a very short-term strategy for preservation. The only thing which will really work is preservation in honey. The problem there is
just sent a
that
flick of
honey
paint, God knows where.
itself, especially in Aboriginal honeys, which have a lot more water in them than what you get in those little plastic bears at the AMP. Aboriginal honeys are very runny, and so what do? They themselves have the capacity for turning into a psychoactive substance, alcohol. But alcohol promotes a completely different set of cultural values and attitudes than psilocybin. Psilocybin is a boundary-dissolving hallucinogen. Mead alcohol gives an enhanced sense of verbal acuity in the presence of lowered sensitivity to social cues. In other words, one can make an ass of oneself. But now I want to backtrack for a minute. I will return to this thing about the loss of the mushroom, but there's something that I want to go over with you that's really important in all this to me. And that is, this isn't simply the story of how an intoxicant promoted consciousness, and then we fell into history by losing that intoxicant and went on to other intoxicants with consequences to be evaluated. It's that, but it's more, because psilocybin had a very, very peculiar effect over and above what I've mentioned so far. And it is this over and above effect that makes my theory so controversial and so, and academics, I think, so phobic of it, because it rips open a whole can of worms. And this is the problem. All primates, clear back to squirrel monkeys and old world monkeys, all primates form dominance hierarchies. This means that the sharp-fanged, hard-bodied young males control everybody else. The women, the elderly, the sick, the children, homosexuals, everybody finds their place somewhere in this dominance hierarchy run by these dominant alpha males. We are no different. We also, as we sit here this evening, operate under this kind of a social organization. I mean, we complain about it, we analyze it, we are aware of it, but we live under it. It's how it is. So here is my suggestion, that what psilocybin did was it changed behavior. It interfered with primate behavior. Specifically, it interfered with this tendency to form monogamous pairs and dominance hierarchies. And so the ordinary tendency of the primates to organize themselves that way was interrupted, medicated out of existence, if you like, vaccinated against, if you like, by the presence of psilocybin in the diet. And this overemphasizing or chemical accentuation of sexuality occasioned by the arousal of the psilocybin was sufficient to dissolve the ordinary tendency toward monogamy and replace it with an orgiastic sexual style, or they coexisted simultaneously. I mean, who knows? We weren't there. It's sort of the way I imagine it is that at every new and full moon there were group mushroom parties which basically simply got out of hand regularly. And so the monogamous pair bond would be under pressure, if not completely eliminated. Many cultures have this, even to this day. I mean, in a sense, Mardi Gras is a festival where the rules are dissolved, and nobody is supposed to go to their spouse the Monday after and say, you know, was that you I saw dressed as Marie Antoinette? And because, you know, the rules are, there is permission to break the rules, and many societies do this. The result of an orgiastic style like that is men cannot trace lines of male paternity. And so there's a tremendous social glue, a tremendous force for the cohesion of community. Men don't then think in terms of my children. They think in terms of our children, the children of the group. And under the aegis of this group, this polymorphic sexual style, group child care and extended family rearing, we produced everything that we think of as human, that we value. Our art, our music, our philosophy, our sense of each other's worth, body painting, tattooing, piercing, all the accoutrements that distinguish us from animal existence were put in place when we had a different kind of mind than we have now. We didn't have a mind that favored role specialization and male dominance and anxiety over female sexual activity related to feelings of male ownership. That all came later. We became human beings in this other world of values and psychological attitudes. Problem is that, as I say, the mushroom faded. But by the time it had faded, we were no longer the wordless symbiotes of cattle, the barely sentient hunters of the African plain. By the time we were finished with the mushrooms, we had language, we had social institutions, but what we began to lose was, you can get as wet-eyed as you want about it, but respect for each other, a sense of each other's individuality, a sense of love, a sense of community. And it must have been, though it happened over a long period of time, very much like what we're living through now. A sense that people are, no damn good and getting worse. A sense that, why can't we be as we once were? Where is our sense of each other? Where is our ability to care for each other? So forth and so on. I wrote a book called Food of the Gods, in which I tell this story in the first third of the book that I just told you. And then I show that what history is essentially is a careening, out-of-control effort to find our way back to this state of primordial balance. One of the things that marks us as humans that is unique is our obsessions with drugs, our ability to addict. We addict not only to substances, we addict to each other, we addict to ideologies, Marxism, Christianity, skinkism as practiced in Washington, whatever. And we addict to each other. I am a romantic with the best of them, but I can't help noticing that a broken heart and heroin withdrawal show very similar presentations. Really. Insomnia, sweating, sense of diminished self-esteem, hysteria, it's very, very similar. So a psychologist looking at a person with an addictive syndrome will say, well, you were damaged.
Okay, trying to decide what's happening next with this, how much more detail I'm going to incorporate into it, but I don't know. I don't think it's done yet, but it might be close. So let me back my zoom out. There we go. Alright, so as you can see, that gives some of the upper limbs sort of an aura and a glow around them. And continued that around through the rest of the composition, some of the aspen trees, as well as the purple foreground flower.
Into the cold, hard world of modern science, existentialism, and all the rest of it.
So that's it for the moment. That's Adam Sturch broadcasting from the Mushroom Mansion, Taos, New Mexico, working on oil painting Old Tree B. Have a good night, Earth.